Welcome to the ETICS online tutorials. This is Module 3, installing the ETICS client. The ETICS client consists in a set of command line tools and Python APIs that provide the same functionality as the online web graphical user interface, but are better suited for integration within existing processes, workflows and tools. They also allow users to perform local builds and tests on their own computers. Security, authentication and authorization follow the same model as the rest of the ETICS system. Guest access is available for read-only operations, typically checkout, build and test, while editing operations require the configuration of client certificates, standard X509 certificates. Authorization is based on roles. Developers, integrators, testers and so on can perform different operations in the system. The recommended way of installing the client is by using the client installation scripts that can be found on the ETICS website or directly on the ETICS repository. This script installs the client from source, and it is therefore recommended for installation on any type of platform. Alternative packages like RPMs and Debian files are also available. The client has a number of installation prerequisites. It currently works on Linux-based systems and macOS. It also works on Windows, although a number of manual steps have to be performed. In addition, there are certain libraries that the client has to find pre-installed in the system, like the Python development libraries, OpenSSL or the OpenSSL development libraries. Let's see in practice how the client gets installed. We are now logged in a Sun Scientific Linux version 4 machine, Linux-based, in a clean directory. And we are now ready to install the client. We are working as a non-privileged user, a normal user. Once we know the environment is up to date, we can download the client installation script. We can use a wget command to get the installation script from the ETICS repository. This link is generic and always points to the latest stable release version of the ETICS client. Once the client has been downloaded, and by convention we give it the name ETICS client setup, we can run it using a Python command. The installation script verifies the environment and installs the client libraries and commands and all necessary tools and plugins required by a standard client installation. It builds everything from source, if possible, in order to make the script easily portable to many different platforms. During the installation, you may see warnings depending on the platform you are using, but unless the client stops with an error, you can safely ignore all the warnings. It is now installing all the required quality assurance plugins, and at the end of this process, the client is installed and ready to be used. It is necessary as a last thing to configure the environment by setting the ETICS home environment variable and adding the command line tools to the local path. It is just sufficient to copy and paste the last two lines of the client installation. In principle, we can now execute any command directly in the installation location of the client, but it is better to create separate workspaces for executing builds and tests. So we create just a new directory. Let's call it WS for workspace, and we cd into this directory. This is just an empty directory. Before it can be used as a workspace, it has to be configured. The configuration operation has to be done only once per every new workspace we want to use, and can be easily done by executing the command ETICS workspace setup. This command creates a few files and directories that are required for the correct operations of the client. Once the client is configured to run in the workspace, we can use any of the available ETICS commands to perform build and test operations or modify the existing configurations. For example, we can start by looking at the projects registered in ETICS. This can be done by executing the command ETICS list project, which connects to the ETICS database and retrieves a complete list of all the projects. In order to work with a particular project, we need to get the information about this project from the ETICS database. We do this by issuing the command ETICS get project followed by the name of the project. For example, ETICS in this case. This command retrieves the information about the project from the ETICS database and prepares the workspace for build and test operations. At this point, we are ready to perform the standard checkout and build operations on the client. We can only do read-only operations since we haven't configured any security. In order to configure the security for the client and other configuration parameters, we can use the ETICS configuration files. There are 3 configuration files. The first configuration files is called the system configuration files, and it's installed by default in the etc directory of the client installation. It is called etics.conf. The second configuration file is installed the first time you install the client in your user home directory, and it is called .etics.conf. And finally, there is the possibility of creating a workspace specific configuration file by just copying, for example, the system configuration file in the workspace. The 3 configuration files are used for different reasons. The system configuration files in the client etc directory contains parameters that have to be used for all users and all workspaces for which this client is used. The user configuration file in the user home directory is of course specific just to a particular user, and the workspace configuration files only affect the workspace where the user is currently working. So by configuring different parameters in the different configuration files, you can change the behavior of the client at different levels. In order to configure the security, we can, for example, use the user configuration file and set the configuration parameters x509 user cert and x509 user key. These parameters take the path of your user certificate and user key in PEM format. The configuration files contains many other parameters which normally don't have to be modified by the user unless you want to get specific behaviors like connecting to a different ETICS server or using a system-wide repository cache instead of having a workspace specific repository cache. It is also possible to set the platform for the system, the client, the user or the workspace to override the local detection. Normally the client detects the local platform and configures the builds and tests using this information. You can see what is your local platform by using the command etics list platform detect. In this case, we are running on a CERN Scientific Linux 4 machine, 64-bit architecture, with a compiler, the GCC compiler version 3.4.6. The client is now installed and ready for use. Now that you know how to install successfully the client on your local computer, we are ready to move to the next step and perform the first build with the ETICS system.